as I try to stay positive about Tottenham in the face of what seems like a growing discontent within the fan base. My patience is tested by a stat on Spurs' away form that is just hard to get away from. Meanwhile, an ex-Tottenham jet-heeled winger is abused by his national coach for following the coin, and the self-proclaimed GOAT, Cristiano Ronaldo, gives an update on his future within the game. All this and more on today's daily Premier League transfer news, general news, all the news. There is some leftover transfer news happening because some of the windows throughout Europe and around the world are still open. So I'll be getting to that, but also Premier League news. And as ever, thank you guys so much for watching and for listening. Please do press that like button. Please do subscribe on YouTube if you're not already. Press the subscribe button and the bell button so you know when the content is coming to you. And also, go over to the podcast platforms, be that Spotify or Apple Podcasts, search for the Spurred On podcast and give me a follow or a subscribe there and leave a rating. Really helps me make this daily content for you. Thanks so much, but let's get on with it. And as I mentioned in that opening there is a stat that I read yesterday that is, it's kind of blown me away actually, and I think gives some kind of oxygen to some of the negativity that I've certainly seen within my comment section and all over social media around Big Ange Postecoglou's Tottenham. It is that Tottenham have now just won one of the last 30 Premier League away games when trailing at half-time. Now, of course, only, let's say, 21 of those, I guess, will have been under Ange Postecoglou, so 9 where it wasn't Ange Postecoglou, but 21 is a big sample size, and the reality is that shows a little bit of a lack of grit, a little bit of a lack of character and leadership. And they are things that I have to say that I really do think about when it comes to what Ange Postecoglou wants to instill in a side of his. And I think it's just maybe a little bit of a result of the turnover of players. You know, let's face it, he's been looking to get out the older players, the players who were experienced under the likes of Pochettino, Nuno, Mourinho and Conte. He's wanted to ship them out in the most part. In fact, I think only really Ben Davis is left over from players who played under Maurizio Pochettino. And Big Ange has wanted to bring in an influx of younger players, hungry players. And while that turnover has happened and is still happening, and as I mentioned it yesterday, we can just call it the painful rebuild, the reality is that we're just not able yet to turn ourselves around from positions of adversity. Now, the flip side of that, I agree that is a difficult stat to hear and it's something that we need to change. However, the reality is in the Premier League, it is no surprise that betting companies put odds of 25-1 on teams who are losing at halftime to go on to win at full time. For any of you that are not into gambling, that means if you put £10 on that happening and it happened, you'd win £250. That is how unlikely it is to happen in the Premier League. So there's a little bit of a disconnect in the reality of how often that happens in the Premier League, you being losing at halftime to win at full time. But still, it is an uncomfortable stat because going back to the days of Maurizio Pochettino, turning things around from positions where they weren't looking good was something that we did all the time. It was character. It was belief. And although Ange Postecoglou in his time at Spurs, his teams have scored a lot of very late goals, and that is another shower of the players willing to go 110% for the entire 95, 96, 97 minutes. What we need more of is when we go down 1-0, 2-0, we need to be turning those games around to really show that we can challenge towards the upper echelons of the Premier League. And I think that will take time and patience. And I know, like I said, it does give oxygen to those of you who are feeling very negative about Big Ange Postecoglou and his tactics and his strategy, but also maybe Enoch and Daniel Levy, who's getting a lot of abuse, certainly this week after that Newcastle result. And maybe he's getting abused at the moment because deemed not to have spent enough money in this transfer window. In fact, actually, I saw a replay of Alan Pardew on Sky Sports News. I think it was from during the Tottenham versus Newcastle defeat at the weekend, where Alan Pardew was saying, I do not see what the strategy is at Spurs at the moment, because you would think now that they have the stadium in place, they have the training ground in place, they have the revenue coming in from the stadium, he was saying, surely now they should be pushing to try and win the Premier League. And he said that he didn't see from the transfers that we'd made this summer that we're trying to do that. And then to kind of bury the knife in our back even more, he then said, you see that at Arsenal, don't you? In terms of, obviously, he's talking about them spending £100 million on Declan Rice and 70 million pounds on Kai Havertz. The only caveat I would have to add to that is that, and I always stress this, it's important to remember Tottenham are the most in-debt club in the world. And that is because of the stadium build. And the reality of that stadium build is it has lumbered us with £1.2 billion debt. And yes, that has been spread out over a number of years by Daniel Levy, and in something that a lot of people within the business world say is great business sense. We're paying that off kind of every year for 35 years. But the reality of that, in my opinion, and let me know what you think in the comments, the reality of it is it does affect our ability to spend huge. And it will do, I think, for another 4 or 5 years. As I always say, the difference in time between when Arsenal moved into the Emirates Stadium and when they were able to spend big was between 2006 when they moved in to 2012-13 when they first went big on Mesut Ozil, and then actually 2017 to 18 when they finally started going really big with like £75 million bids and signings for the likes of Nicola Pepe, etc., etc. So it is going to take longer for Tottenham Hotspur to utilise that revenue that they're very cleverly getting in to the stadium and from the stadium, but it's going to take a bit longer, and that debt needs to be managed. And I'm afraid to say, in a very similar way, what happened when, if you remember, when Tottenham were the first club of all time not to spend money during successive transfer windows back when they were building the stadium. And everyone got very frustrated and upset because Daniel Levy came out and said the stadium build will not affect our ability to spend money in the transfer market. Well, it clearly did, and the reality for me was Daniel Levy couldn't come out and say we won't be able to spend any money, because if they did that, then the vultures would have circled our great players, Harry Kane, Dele Alli, Christian Eriksen, Jan Vertonghen, Toby Alderweireld, Moussa Dembele, to name but a few. He had to say that we are in a position of strength, because otherwise it wouldn't have made sound business sense. And the same applies now. You know, he cannot come out and say that we can't spend the same amount of money as Arsenal can spend or as Man City has spent because of the debt we're in. He has to say that we're managing this debt over a period of time. But the reality is it does affect it. I'm sure it does. And it's not ideal. Of course it's not ideal. But hopefully over the next few years, just as Arsenal did when, if you remember, under Arsene Wenger, they had to sell their prime assets all the time. Cesc Fabregas, Robin van Persie, Samir Nasri. For a number of years, they had to sell those players because they were in financial difficulty around their stadium build. Well, Tottenham are still in that period of time, I'm afraid. But let me know in the comments, and like I always say, it's very subjective football, and I don't mind those of you who are angry at ENIC, angry at Daniel Levy, even those of you who think that Big Ange Postecoglou isn't the right manager for us. I just happen to disagree. When it comes to ENIC and Daniel Levy, I'm by no means a supporter of theirs. They're board members. They're people in the upper echelons of the business. I don't support them. It's not that. That's not how it works. But what I always say is, who do I look at in terms of other Premier League clubs and think they are the chairman I would rather have? And the reality is, I'm afraid, not that many. I don't want to be run by a state. I just don't. I think it'll be grotty. I don't want to be run by an oligarch like Chelsea were under Roman Abramovich. I don't want to be run by someone like Todd Bowley, who did nearly buy Spurs, by the way, and has just turned Chelsea into a complete laughing stock. It is a laughing stock. My cousins are big Chelsea fans, and they honestly do not know some of the players who are in the squads for their match days in the Premier League. They don't know how to pronounce their names. Some other Chelsea fan friends are exactly the same. So I don't want them as chairman. And then if you look at FSG, Liverpool's chairman and ownership, the Liverpool fans are unhappy with them. Even though they've won a Champions League, they've won a Premier League, they've won numerous trophies under FSG, they are unhappy with them and think that they haven't spent enough money either. So the reality is, I think when it comes to chairman and board members, you know, it's very difficult to satisfy anyone all the time. And therefore, when I think about ENIC and I think about Daniel Levy, I don't support them. I don't care that much. I think they've done a good job in terms of building Spurs up from where Spurs were when they took over. And now, yeah, I know a lot of you will say, oh, in the 20 years prior to them taking over, we won the FA Cup, we won the League Cup, etc., etc. But we were a club on the way down. I promise you, when they took over, we were on the way down. Mismanagement from Alan Sugar as chairman, from Irving Scholar before him as chairman. And they have built us back up through infrastructure in the main part. And actually, during their early days, through spending money on players badly, by the way, that is something that you can you can kind of put at Daniel Levy's door, that a lot of the time the scouts and the managers that they've trusted in terms of spending money haven't come through successfully enough. Certainly in the early days. They were spending more money than Arsenal in those early days. In the days where Arsenal bought Thierry Henry, Spurs were spending more money than that on players that didn't really kick us on. Les Ferdinand, for example. But anyway, I think I brought up Les Ferdinand. He might actually have even been before Dan Levy. I'm not sure, but I remember being frustrated because at the time when we bought Les Ferdinand for £6 million, we had sold Teddy Sheringham for £3 million to Manchester United, and actually, he was so much better as striker for Spurs. Anyway, I digress. I've gone off on a little bit of a tangent, but that's how I feel about it. And in terms of that away stat where I started with that, it is a frustrating one, and we need to turn that round and be more successful in turning games around. Moving on with more Spurs news, Decky Kulusevski did an interview and has given some quotes. I thought I'd read them for you in terms of how he feels about the Newcastle game. He said, very disappointed with the result. I thought the performance was good first half and even better in the second half. So very disappointed not to win the game, but I think the team did very well and we're on the right track. I thought we played really well and killed their energy in the stadium, and we were very calm with the ball. Everyone showed that they wanted the ball. So it was a big test for us, and I think we did very well in the right way. We're on the right road to what we want to become. We had chances, but I think the final balls were not perfect in many circumstances, or maybe there were a couple of shots that got blocked. Of course, we can be more dangerous. It was different. Of course it's different, said the 24-year-old in terms of him playing as the false nine at the beginning of that game. He said that in the second half, I went back to midfield where I had much more space and we dominated the game. It was a really good game and I feel very good, but I'm not happy we couldn't win the game. But we move on and we have our heads up. I think that kind of sums up exactly how I feel about the game and Kulusevski's performance in the game. And also, like I mentioned in yesterday's videos, just so many times where we had like 3-on-3s or 4-on-4s, and it was just a matter of being patient and picking the final ball. And we just don't quite have that at the moment due to, I think, a mixture of rustiness and maybe some of the players not knowing each other's games, by which I mean kind of Odibert with Kulusevski, with Sonny and Brennan Johnson. They're going to need some more time to kind of get to know exactly what runs each other are making. There was certainly, I mentioned yesterday again, one occasion where Odibert should have played a reverse ball into Sonny, but also a couple of occasions where Sonny was a little bit too selfish, if you ask me, and should have slipped Brennan Johnson in on the right. And they are the differences. They are the minuscule differences in the Premier League. You have to be killers. You have to take advantage, especially away from home in the Premier League. You have to take advantage from those transitions, from those times where you win the ball high up the park. You have to score those goals. It's simple as that. And if we'd scored half of those chances that we had, we would have won that game. Kulusevski was asked about the change in Tottenham's set pieces. He said the following: new assistant coach Nick Montgomery is helping with both the attacking and defensive set pieces. And Kulusevski said this: we do it in training, everything we can to score. It was a good thing and we almost scored from it. We've got to keep working on everything and enjoy them. So I mentioned it yesterday. I thought Spurs were a lot more positive in terms of their attacking set pieces and their defensive set pieces. And don't forget, last year at St James's Park we conceded a goal from a set piece corner. We didn't do that this game, and also I thought having Dragusin in there, who's such an attacking menace when it comes to just trying to win the ball from defensive and attacking set pieces. So that benefited us as well. Of course, Decky Kulusevski is the captain of the Swedish team during this international break, and Lucas Bergwijn has been called up for his first international squad. And he was asked about Bergwijn, and he said he has been fantastic. He's come in and he's doing really well every day at Spurs, training hard and learning from the other players. I'm happy for him, and I'm happy that I can bring him to the national team with me. He was asked how important he thinks Bergwijn could be for Sweden in the future, and he said huge. He's very young, but I think he can help us already right now. So I'm happy that he's going to be here. Of course he's young, but we'll be there to guide him and help him. So I'm sure you've heard from me enough now how much I love the look of Lucas Bergwijn. I'm excited to see him get starts. Maybe that'll be in the Carabao Cup first of all, and maybe the Europa League when that starts at the end of September. I think he looks like he's got everything, and he could be our next Christian Eriksen. I really think that. I know we got James Maddison, but it excites me the thought that actually maybe Bergwijn could play with Maddison as 2/8s in those kind of games where there are 11 men behind the ball, in those games where opposition clubs like Everton did, like Newcastle did, like Leicester did. They set up 11 men behind the ball, and we need 2 creators to open them up. And maybe we could move Kulusevski out to the right for some of those games, play Bergwijn and Maddison, and I think they'll have a beautiful understanding, little 1 and 2 touch triangles with the 3 of them. Very, very exciting. I saw some quotes from Roy Keane during the Sky Sports broadcast of the Newcastle game, which I didn't bring to you during yesterday's video, and I thought they were interesting and worth going into. So he said the following. He said, the Spurs players, it's just their body language. They switch off for the throw, and you see they're having a breather at the wrong time. They get some bodies back, but they're all in the one line. And I'm always asking, when the ball comes in towards the middle of your box, and he's talking about for the first goal we conceded, where are your 2 centre-halves? Maddison has got to do better, but it's the 2 centre-halves. You see a couple of Spurs players there waving their arms up in the air. Forget about that. Someone get out to it. They just switch off for a split second. And actually, guys, thank you so much for your comments in the comments box yesterday about this. Got a few of you commenting that I hadn't mentioned how Cristiano Romero, for that first goal, had gone bombing down the pitch actually to press Newcastle's centre half. And I watched it again, and that's what happened. And therefore, he was out of position when the quick throw-in was taken. You've got to give some credit to Newcastle. They noticed that. They took it early, and Lloyd Kelly took advantage of that by getting to the byline and crossing it back. To be fair to Yves Bissouma, he had dropped 5 or 10 yards to try and get in for Cristiano Romero, but his defensive instincts were not quite right. He dropped into the position, but what he really needed to do was be on the man, Harvey Barnes, and fair play to Harvey Barnes. It was a really good finish on the half volley. So maybe Cristiano Romero will think twice. We've got to give some caveat here, because one of the things we love about Romero is that sometimes he takes the ball by the horns and he bombs out to either press someone or to make up a second striker, and we love that about him when it goes well. And sometimes the reality is, when you take risks like that, and of course playing under Ange Postecoglou, a lot of it is about taking risks. When that happens, you are going to concede some goals sometimes, and that is what happened. Also, the Sky Sports co-commentator Andy Hinchcliffe talked about Brennan Johnson during that Newcastle Spurs game. He said the following: the pace of Johnson, of course, if you remember, Johnson came on in the second half and I thought had one of his really good games, certainly his best game of the season. He changed the game for Spurs, allowed us to really dominate Newcastle in that second half. Andy Hinchcliffe said this: the pace of Johnson gets him away. It's just his teammates can't keep up with him. They can't get into the 6-yard box to get on the end of the cross. It's fair to say Brennan Johnson's been Tottenham's best player, and he's only played half the match. Well, I have to say, that is where having Sonny as the number 9, or Decky Kulusevski as the number 9, but it was Sonny in that second half, it's not ideal, because he is not a fox in the box. That is where having Dominic Solanke, when he's fit, we've got to really hope that he is going to take advantage of those. And again, I do feel, and I know it's hindsight and, you know, nobody really knows, totally hypothetical, but if Solanke had played, if Mickey van der Ven had played, I don't think we'd have lost that game. And actually, my flatmate is a Newcastle fan, and he said if van der Ven had played, I don't think Newcastle would have won that game. And I agree. But look, one of the things about the Premier League and where Tottenham are trying to improve this season is you've got to have the squad depth available to still get results when some of your best players are out. And unfortunately, just this week, we did not have that. A little bit of Spurs transfer news, or indirect Spurs transfer news anyway. Ex-Tottenham winger Steven Bergwijn, by the way, who is a player who I think, if we still had him under Ange Postecoglou, I think would have got a lot of minutes. He would have loved the direct style of Ange Postecoglou, but he is signed for Al Ittihad in Saudi Arabia from Ajax. Saudi's transfer window is still open, and that is a surprising one for me. West Ham were interested in him in the summer apparently, but Bergwijn has gone to Saudi Arabia. He's only 26, and his international manager, the Dutch manager, former Southampton manager and Everton manager Ronald Koeman, said the following. He's gone in hard. He said Steven Bergwijn has gone to Saudi Arabia at the age of 26. It's clear that this has nothing to do with sporting ambition. His book with the Dutch national team is now closed. And he ended it by saying, Steven probably knows that I would have said this. So Ronald Koeman has basically just said anyone who moves to Saudi Arabia is clearly just chasing money, and therefore they will not be considered for the Dutch national side. Possibly cutting off his nose to spite his face there, although the Dutch do have a strong squad at the moment. But as ever, Ronald Koeman showing he's not the best man manager of all time. And then the other bit of transfer news that I think relates indirectly to Spurs is the big Victor Osimhen to Galatasaray news that it went through yesterday. Big here we go, big there we land. The deal done, all documents approved. The release clause will be 75 million euros if anyone wants to get Osimhen out of Napoli, which is an option that is going to extend till 2027. The loan move is only till 2025 to Galatasaray. 9 to 10 million euros salary, all covered by the Turkish club. No buy option, no obligation. The reason I think this affects Spurs is because Tottenham have to go to Galatasaray away in the Europa League this season. Welcome to hell. I mentioned it yesterday. And one of the hardest games you can get in Europe, not just in the Europa League. And now they've got Victor Osimhen up front as well. And that will be a marquee game that he will want to score in, because he wanted a big Premier League move this summer, no doubt. But nobody would go for him. In fact, Arsenal were offered the chance to buy him apparently back in June for between 120 to 130 million euros. But they immediately said no. They were linked again later in the summer, as were Chelsea. But both clubs balked at his huge salary demands. Apparently he wanted so much more to come and play in the Premier League. So I think that will make it a difficult game that was always going to be a very hard game against Galatasaray, but that will make it even harder. Okay, guys, before I go into some other Premier League transfer news and wide-ranging news, please do once again press that like button if you haven't already. Really helps get the video seen by more people. Do subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. Thank you so much for watching. Do press that subscribe button and the bell button so you know when my daily content is coming into your inbox. And you can become a member. Really helps me. Just £1 a month. All the details of how are in the description box below. I'd love to have you as a member of the channel. Starting at Old Trafford, Eric Ten Hag, little stat here. Eric Ten Hag is the first Manchester United manager to lose 2 of the club's first 3 games of a Premier League campaign on multiple occasions. That's after he first did it in 2022-23, and he's done it again this season. And I can tell you, the wolves are already out. The knives are out for Eric Ten Hag. And as I expected, I mentioned this a lot in the summer, after Man United did the weird thing of looking for another manager, speaking to other managers, and then staying with Eric Ten Hag, excuse me, it always meant that whenever he had a couple of bad results, the press would be on his back, the fans would be on his back. And as a result, Manchester United have given him already the dreaded vote of confidence. If you don't know about the dreaded vote of confidence, back in the day, managers would get a vote of confidence from their chairman, and it would almost inevitably lead to them losing their jobs in the few weeks straight afterwards. And Man United CEO Omar Barada said the following yesterday: Eric Ten Hag has our full backing, and we worked very closely together in this transfer window. We're going to continue working very closely with him to help him get the best results out of the team. Man United sporting director Dan Ashworth doubled down with this vote of confidence, saying it was not unusual for a sporting director like him to link up with a manager that was already in place, because Ashworth arrived after Ten Hag was in the job, obviously. And he said the following: very rarely do you go into a job as a sporting director and there is no manager in place. All I can do is reiterate that I've really enjoyed working with Eric for the last 8 weeks. My job is to support him in every way I possibly can, whether that's operationally, with recruitment, medical, psychology, or the training ground flow, to allow him to fully focus on the training pitch and match tactical plan to deliver success for Manchester United. Well, I think Ten Hag is on a hiding to nothing, and the longer that he stays in the job, even now he's got his players back. And a lot of the fans last season, I've got a lot of Man United fan friends, and they were saying, oh, it's because Martinez is injured, it's because of all the injuries. Well, every club has to suffer from injuries, and Man United, one of the biggest clubs in the world, who spent the most money in the world over the past years since Sir Alex Ferguson left, they need to be doing better, and Ten Hag is not the man to do it. He's not a good man manager, in my opinion, and he is not a good tactical manager at the moment. He does not have a style of play, which I've always found very weird, because his Ajax team that Spurs beat in the semi-final just about of the Champions League in 2019, they played beautiful football. And that was the Ajax way, but he can't seem to instill that into Manchester United. Okay, moving on to Anfield. Liverpool and Arsenal among the clubs closely monitoring 18-year-old Palmeiras centre-back, the Brazilian Vitor Reis, apparently. So looks like Liverpool's new sporting director, they're looking to go young and build up from youth again. Meanwhile, Liverpool, a little stat, have won their opening 3 Premier League games without conceding a goal for the first time since 2018-19 under Jurgen Klopp. They finished as runners-up to Manchester City on 97 points that season. I personally think it's too early to judge Arne Slot's tenure at Liverpool. I've always said I think it's very difficult to follow a legacy manager, a manager who's done incredibly for a long period of time like Jurgen Klopp did. But was very impressed with the way they ripped Manchester United to shreds at Old Trafford. That is a really good sign for Liverpool, but it will, similarly to what I said about Eric Ten Hag, it will remain to be seen how Slot deals with it if they have a couple of bad results, 3 bad results, and suddenly the pressure comes on and fans will start to say, oh, he's no Jurgen Klopp, he's not as good as Klopp. So if that happens, that is the time to judge Arne Slot and how he bounces back from that. Chelsea, now over to Stamford Bridge. Al Nassr have signed Angelo from Chelsea, worth a package of 23 million euros, including a sell-on clause for a future sale percentage. Who is Angelo? I don't know who Angelo is. Another Todd Bowley, Clear Lake signing, and they've got 23 million euros for him. As far as I know, let me know in the comments if I'm wrong, has he ever even played for Chelsea? How does this happen? They've just stockpiled players. They've got like 45, 50 players. Just madness at that club. And I would not, as I said earlier, in terms of Spurs and the ownership, I would not swap my ownership for Chelsea's ownership at all, even though they've spent £1 billion. It's not all about the money. It's not all about having money and just spending it on the best wonder kids that you've seen on Football Manager, as Chelsea clearly have done. There's got to be more to it, and it's not going to work at Chelsea, certainly not in the short term. Over to Newcastle. The club's now interested in Kieran Trippier, who is, as I said yesterday, looking for a move out of Tyneside, are Fenerbahce, Besiktas and Ayupspor in Turkey. And that is after Saudi club Al Ittihad tried to sign the 33-year-old former England international. Will Trippier go for one last big move to Turkey? It would be a bit disappointing, I think, if he did. Meanwhile, West Ham apparently are interested in former Liverpool player and centre-half Joel Matip. The Cameroon international is on a free transfer, and West Ham looking for that free transfer opportunity to try and get another centre-half through the doors. A bit of interesting reports coming from Everton. That is, David Moyes is in shock contention to make a sensational return to the dugout there, according to sources. Sean Dyche's job is under threat after their horrific start to the season, where they've lost all 3 games. 4-0 to us, 3-0 on the opening day, and then from 2-0 up with only about 10 minutes to go against Bournemouth at home, they lost 3-2. Terrible start for Everton. They need to turn that around quickly. But to go to David Moyes, that is going from, Sean Dyche, who is a pretty direct, quite negative manager, to David Moyes, who is a pretty direct negative manager without even any modernity about him. He's just an old dinosaur as far as I'm concerned. Although, obviously, if you're Everton's board, you look at him and how well he did at West Ham, winning them a European trophy and getting them from kind of relegation candidates into European candidates. Maybe they're looking at that and thinking, bring him back. I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Everton apparently turned down the opportunity to sign Chelsea defender Axel Disasi and their Ivory Coast forward David Fofana in a swap deal for Dominic Calvert-Lewin on deadline day. They kept Calvert-Lewin, and actually he got a goal against Bournemouth, so maybe he can go on a bit of a run now. Meanwhile, over to South London with Arsenal, and they have rejected a late attempt from Al Ittihad in Saudi Arabia to sign Leandro Trossard on an initial season-long loan, and they've insisted they've no intention of allowing the Belgian forward to leave the club. The Saudi Arabian club are understood to have proposed to pay £4 million for a loan fee to take Trossard, with an obligation to make the deal permanent for around £25 million. But the South London club dismissed it. They view the 29-year-old as a vital member of their squad, and you can see why, because he always comes on and scores goals for them, and that is despite the fact that Raheem Sterling signed on loan from Chelsea on deadline day. They still see Trossard as very important and didn't want to let him go. Finally, just some general Premier League news and stats from the 3rd game week. The most goal involvements in the Premier League after the first 3 game weeks. This is probably particularly helpful if you play fantasy Premier League. Erling Haaland with 7, all goals by the way. 6 Mo Salah, Cole Palmer with 5, and Saka and Luis Diaz with 4. All the big names there. Some general other stats. Man City currently 26 Premier League games unbeaten. 12 Premier League wins in a row. Can anyone stop them winning a 5th consecutive Premier League title? And as I mentioned maybe yesterday, I still think, is it possible that Pep Guardiola is still at Manchester City, where he's got nothing else to prove, because he wants to try and make them invincible this season? Before the charges come home to roost at the end of the season and maybe Man City get a huge penalty, does Pep Guardiola want to stay there? And is he drumming into his players? Can we remain unbeaten all this season and really take all of the records that were there in the Premier League before? Arsenal with the Invincibles, obviously. Manchester United with the treble, that's already gone. that is what I think. I think that is all that Pep can be motivated for anymore. Erling Haaland has now scored 70 goals in 69 Premier League games for Man City, including 8 hat-tricks. He set the record for most goals in a single season in the competition's history. He's won back-to-back Golden Boots. He scored back-to-back hat-tricks this season, twice in all, and is now the first player to score 7 goals in the opening 3 matches of a single campaign. As a Spurs fan, I'm like, maybe this is another reason why Harry Kane was willing to go to Bayern Munich, because he knew he wasn't going to win any more Golden Boots. But I personally still think Harry Kane should have stayed at Spurs, and if he'd stayed under Ange Postecoglou, I think he would have scored 30 league goals minimum last season, and Spurs would have got to the top 4. But, he made his decision, went to Bayern Munich, and I think under Vincent Kompany this season, he will win some trophies. But Erling Haaland, I think realistically he'll probably move to a Spanish club probably in the next 2 or 3 seasons, but otherwise he would be a shoo-in to be the record goal scorer in the Premier League, beating Alan Shearer's record probably within the next 6 or 7 seasons. That's all it would take him. Just some other news. Chris Smalling has gone to Saudi Arabia from Roma. And finally, as I mentioned at the top, Portuguese legend CR7 Cristiano Ronaldo says he has no plans, despite being 39 years old, to retire from international football yet. But he says that it will not be a difficult decision to make when he does choose to retire. He has more caps and more goals than anybody else in men's international football history. 130 strikes in 212 games. One final question to leave you with. Who is the GOAT? Is it CR7, as he thinks he is? Is it Lionel Messi, bit more humble? Is it Maradona or even Pele from back in the day? Let me know what you think in the comments section below. Guys, thank you so much for watching. Please do drop this a like if you haven't already. Do subscribe for daily Premier League and Tottenham content, and become a member. Just £1 a month really helps me make this content for you. All the details of how in the description box below. Have a great rest of your day. Cheers.